Hello and welcome to English Spark Official. I'm Zayden, joined as always by Alara.
Hey everyone! We're so excited about today's topic.
Imagine just like hacking your brain to speak an entirely new language 38% faster.
Right.
Not by, reading a single textbook or not by memorizing those endless conjugation tables that we all hate.
Yeah, those are the worst.
Right. But by essentially becoming like a vocal parrot. So welcome, everyone. So glad you're joining us for this deep dive.
So glad you're here with us.
Today, we are tearing apart this really fascinating document. It's called the English Spark Shattering Playbook Scripting Framework.
Which is quite a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, yeah. But basically, it's a blueprint, right? An internal playbook created by the channel English Spark Official. And it's designed to completely rewire how adults achieve language fluency.
And their central claim is just, honestly, it's wild.
It totally is. They are targeting a massive 38% fluency increase for you, the listener.
Which, that is a staggering metric in the world of language acquisition.
38%.
Right. Because usually when we talk about language learning, progress is measured in like inches,
Yeah, exactly.
A new vocabulary word here, or a slightly better grasp of the past perfect tense there. But a 38% jump in actual fluency, that implies a structural change in how the brain is processing and producing speech.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because for you listening, when we say fluency, we basically mean speaking smoothly, right?
Speaking smoothly, easily, without stopping too much to translate in your head.
Right, without all those painful, awkward pauses. So when I first looked at this stack of notes, my immediate reaction was, well, I was pretty skeptical.
I think we all were, yeah.
Because we all have this, shared trauma from high school language classes, right? Sitting in a rigid, quiet room, staring at a chalkboard, just terrified of the teacher calling on you.
Oh, absolutely. Total nightmare.
But the playbook completely throws that model in the trash. It dictates a totally different method, and it's called shadowing.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the absolute rejection of passive learning.
Passive meaning just sitting there and listening.
Right. The traditional classroom model you just described, that relies on decoding. You look at a symbol on a page, you translate it in your head, you formulate a response, and then you speak.
Right. It's very slow.
Extremely slow. That latency, that gap in time between hearing and speaking, is basically the enemy of fluency.
The enemy? Wow.
Yeah. The English Spark framework attacks that latency directly through this shadowing practice.
Okay, so for you listening, let's think about it like this. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because you cannot just read a book about riding a bike and then magically know how to do it. You have to actually get on the bike, right? You have to push the pedals, practice balancing, probably fall off a few times.
Could definitely fall off.
Yeah, and this playbook is basically the exact set of instructions on how to practice pedaling, but with your voice.
Exactly. So let's define shadowing in the context of this playbook.
Yeah, please do. Because when I hear the word shadowing, I just think of a little kid copying everything their older sibling says just to be annoying.
Right, exactly. Stop copying me.
Stop copying me. Yeah, exactly.
But, it is actually not far off from that, mechanically speaking. Shadowing, according to the framework, requires you to listen to a native speaker say a phrase and then immediately, almost concurrently, repeat what they say.
Like a shadow following a person.
Exactly like a shadow. It's a vocal echo. And the playbook specifically mandates the use of strict auditory cues to trigger this.
Cues meaning signals for the listener.
Right. The hosts in these scripts are required to use specific phrases like repeat after me or listen carefully.
Oh, let's pause there for a second because there's a specific grammar thing happening when they say repeat after me.
The imperative.
Yes, the imperative. For you listening, imperative sentences are basically commands or instructions. When someone says repeat after me, they are giving an instruction. It makes you an active participant, not just a passive listener.
You are doing the work.
Right. But see, that's where my skepticism flares up again. I have to push back here a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't this just mindless echoing? I mean, if I just mimic someone ordering a coffee over and over, I am bypassing the whole cognitive process of actually formulating a sentence myself.
That's a very common critique, actually.
Right. Because how does copying a script teach me to pull my own thoughts out of my head when a real barista asks me a question I haven't rehearsed?
And that is the exact question linguistic researchers ask. And it's why the framework is so carefully constructed.
Yeah.
It's not just mindless copying like a parrot.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain builds motor skills. We realize that speaking a language isn't just an intellectual exercise, it is a physical, athletic act.
An athletic act. I love that.
Right. I mean, English uses entirely different facial muscles, tongue placements, and breath control than, say, Mandarin or Spanish.
Oh, so it's about muscle memory.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You are training the muscles in your mouth. When the framework mandates those direct, imperative cues like, repeat after me, it is essentially forcing the listener to bypass their prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is...
That's where your anxiety lives. It's where you second-guess your grammar.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
By demanding immediate repetition, the playbook forces you to just physically produce the sound without overthinking the mechanics.
That makes a ton of sense. It actually reminds me of how great jazz musicians learn to improvise.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, they don't start by reading complex sheet music and studying music theory textbooks. They put on a record of like Charlie Parker, they pick up their saxophone, and they just play exactly over his notes.
They shadow the recs?
You shadow the record, exactly. They do it 1,000 times until the physical feeling of that swing, that rhythm is just baked into their fingers. And then only later do they start swapping in their own original notes.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
And the English Spark playbook is doing exactly that, but with the human voice.
Yeah.
And the framework specifies that this isn't just one long, breathless stream of repetition either.
Right. That would be exhausting.
It requires repetition of key phrases, but blended with short, natural pauses and small, interactive questions.
Okay, so you're not just a tape recorder.
Right. You mimic the phrase, you build the physical muscle memory, and then the script immediately engages your brain with a quick interactive prompt.
To make sure you actually understand what you just said.
Exactly. To ensure your brain is tracking the meaning of the sounds your mouth just made.
So we are building physical reflexes right alongside cognitive mapping. But here's the catch.
What's the catch?
If I am shadowing Charlie Parker and I've only been playing the saxophone for 2 weeks, I am going to throw my instrument out the window.
Oh, for sure.
It's just too hard. So who is this actually for? The playbook specifically targets learners at the A2 to B2 level.
Right.
For those of you listening who might not be familiar with those labels, A2 is basically a beginner who knows the basics, like survival mode.
You can order food, ask where the bathroom is, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And B2 is someone who can have comfortable conversations. You can debate a movie or talk about your job. Bridging that gap between A2 and B2 is notoriously difficult.
It is honestly the hardest plateau to break in language learning.
Yeah.
Moving from A2 to B2 requires an explosion in vocabulary and an intuitive grasp of complex grammar.
Yeah.
To achieve this, the framework imposes a really strict rule on its writers. Start with simple vocabulary, then gradually increase difficulty.
Which, I mean, that sounds obvious on the surface, right?
It does.
But the execution is where it gets really interesting. It's exactly like lifting weights at the gym.
Right.
You do not try to lift the heaviest weight on your very first day. You'd crush yourself.
Literally.
You start with a small weight, which is the simple vocabulary, and as you get stronger, you add more weight, which means harder words.
Exactly. Because you can't just throw a dictionary at an A2 learner.
No.
And the playbook has this brilliant solution for tough words. It has an absolute mandate. It says, any difficult words must be explained naturally in conversation.
Must be explained.
Yes, and it explicitly forbids complex academic jargon without explanation.
Oh, let's look at that grammar for a second. The word must.
Yeah, that's a strong modal verb.
Right. For you listening, when we use must in English, it shows a very strong rule or a strict requirement. It's not optional. The writers have to do it.
Right, and this raises an important point about cognitive load.
What do you mean by cognitive load?
So when an adult is learning a language, their working memory is already stretched to the absolute limit, just trying to decode the syntax and the sounds.
They're already working so hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you introduce a dense academic word without explaining it simply, the listener's brain basically crashes.
Like a computer overloading.
Yeah. They hit a wall, they feel confused, and they just tune out.
Right. It's like playing a perfectly designed video game. Think about the first level of a really great game like Mario.
Oh, I love Mario.
Right. The game doesn't hand you a 50-page manual on how to jump and duck and shoot. It drops you in a safe room where you literally just have to press the jump button to get over a little log.
Just one simple action.
Exactly. Then the next room requires you to jump and run at the same time. The difficulty scales up, but it's invisible.
Invisible level design.
Yes. The playbook is demanding that the writers act as invisible level designers for the language learner.
That's spot on. And the vehicle for that invisible design is the natural explanation.
Right.
The writers cannot hit pause and say, now let us review the definition of the word exhausted.
Because that sounds like a textbook.
Exactly. It breaks the immersion. Instead, they have to weave the definition into the context of the dialogue.
Right. So if I want to teach you the word exhausted, I don't give you the dictionary definition. I just say to you, man, I worked a 14-hour shift today. I didn't sleep at all. I'm completely exhausted.
And boom, I understand it.
Exactly. I've handed you the complex word, but I've surrounded it with a protective bubble of simple A2 vocabulary. Words like worked, sleep, 14 hours.
So your brain instantly deduces the meaning without me ever treating you like a student.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core stylistic mandate of the entire framework. Yes, because if you want to pull off that kind of natural contextual explanation, the tone of the script has to be incredibly specific.
Right. The playbook demands a natural, human-like conversation. It literally capitalizes the words, not robotic, not textbook.
This is honestly my favorite part of the document. To enforce this anti-textbook rule, they rely on specific personas.
Right, the hosts.
Yeah. The framework dictates that the hosts must be like 20 to 30 years old, friendly, casual, modern.
Yep.
But why that specific age bracket?
Right.
Why not, a distinguished 60-year-old Oxford professor persona? Wouldn't that sound smarter?
Well, it comes down to the psychology of what linguists call the affective filter.
The affective filter, what is that?
It is essentially an emotional wall that goes up in your brain when you feel anxious, judged, or intimidated.
Oh, wow.
And when that emotional wall is up, language acquisition stops entirely. Your brain just shuts the door.
Because you're too scared of making a mistake.
Exactly. A 60-year-old Oxford professor is an authority figure. Talking to them feels like taking an exam.
Right, very intimidating.
But a 20 to 30-year-old conversational tone, that feels like sitting in a coffee shop with friends.
It's relaxed.
Yeah. It lowers that affective filter. You are much more willing to make mistakes and attempt the shadowing practice when you feel like you are just chatting with a peer rather than being graded by a strict teacher.
That makes total sense. And the playbook forces the writers to simulate that coffee shop environment down to the exact conversational mechanics.
It outlines very specific conversation rules.
Yes, it requires a balanced dialogue, but here's the part that genuinely shocked me.
What was it?
It explicitly mandates the use of interruptions, reactions, agreement, and adding light humor.
Why did the interruptions shock you?
Because it goes against everything we are taught in school.
Oh, that's true.
Right. From kindergarten, we are told that polite communication means sitting perfectly still, in total silence, waiting for the other person to finish their entire paragraph before you open your mouth.
Right. Raise your hand before you speak.
Exactly. But this framework is actively telling writers to script interruptions. Why on earth would they do that?
Because real human beings do not speak in perfectly quiet turns.
We really don't.
What the framework is mandating here is a linguistic phenomenon known as back-channeling.
Back-channeling. Okay, let's dig into that for our listeners.
So in any natural conversation, while one person holds the floor and does the talking, the listener is constantly providing auditory feedback.
Like saying, yeah.
Right. They're saying, yeah, exactly. Oh, wow. Or even just laughing.
Yeah, totally.
So you just did it right there.
Oh, I did.
Yeah. You are validating the speaker and driving the rhythm of the conversation. If you script a language lesson without back-channeling, it sounds dead.
It really does.
It sounds like two robots taking turns reading Wikipedia.
Which is exactly what the playbook outlaws. In the what to avoid section, it strictly bans overly long paragraphs without interaction, robotic or repetitive phrasing, and long monologues. And just to clarify for everyone listening, a monologue is when one person talks alone for a very long time without anyone else saying anything.
Which is incredibly boring to listen to.
So boring. If you subject a learner to a long monologue like one person talking uninterrupted for 3 minutes, their attention just drifts away.
Absolutely. By scripting interruptions and agreements, the framework trains the learner for the chaotic, overlapping reality of real-world English.
It prepares them for the real world.
Exactly. Because when they finally step out of their house and talk to a native speaker, they won't freeze up when the native speaker says,
yeah, totally.
Right in the middle of their sentence.
Right. They are essentially immunizing the listener against the messiness of actual human speech.
That's a great way to look at it.
But this presents a huge challenge for the writers, doesn't it?
Oh, massive challenge.
Because if you are having this totally natural, messy, humorous, interrupted conversation, how do you actually teach anything?
Right, you can't just...
You can't just chat aimlessly about the weather for 20 minutes and guarantee a 38% fluency increase. The teacher still needs a plan.
And this is where the structural genius of the playbook comes into focus.
Let's talk about the structure.
It mandates what it calls a blended architecture.
Blended?
Yes, the instruction is explicit. The lesson structure must be blended and not labeled.
Oh, this is huge, meaning the listener should never hear the host say, "Welcome to section 1, vocabulary."
Exactly. Or, now let us commence the grammar portion of our lesson.
Because doing that immediately triggers that school trauma we talked about earlier.
It raises the affective filter right back up.
Right. So if the structure is invisible, what are the actual bones holding up this 20 to 25-minute block of audio?
Well, the playbook outlines a very specific journey. It demands a hook and greeting right at the top.
Catching their attention.
Right. Establishing that warm English Spark official channel identity.
Like we did at the start of this deep dive.
Exactly. Then it moves into an intro and core explanation, where you introduce the topic clearly.
Simple and clear.
And that leads into the deep dive itself. But the crucial mechanism for this deep dive is the requirement to use examples from daily life and real conversations.
Real life. This is the best part, because you cannot teach an abstract grammar concept in a vacuum.
You really can't.
If you want to explain something complicated like the present perfect continuous tense to an A2 learner, you don't give them the mathematical formula.
You don't say subject plus have or has plus been plus verbing.
No, that's terrifying. You don't hand them the blueprint of an engine, you put them in the driver's seat.
Put them in the driver's seat. I like that.
It's like sneaking vegetables into a delicious fruit smoothie.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The vegetables are the boring grammar and vocabulary rules.
Nobody wants to eat plain spinach.
Exactly. But the smoothie, the sweet fruit, is the fun, engaging story of daily life. The listener is getting healthier, they're getting smarter, without even tasting the boring parts.
They don't even know they're learning grammar. The daily life examples in this playbook are the smoothie. You're absorbing the mechanics of English grammar while listening to the hosts, navigate a funny misunderstanding at an airport.
Or debating the best way to cook a steak.
Exactly. The grammar is smuggled into the listener's brain via the narrative.
It's the Trojan horse of language learning.
Yes.
The real-life story is the beautiful wooden horse. The listener gladly pulls it inside the gates of their mind because it's entertaining, it's relatable.
And it's hidden inside the horse.
Are the complex vocabulary and syntax rules. And once it's inside, the grammar sneaks out and sets up camp in their long-term memory.
But the framework understands that passive absorption, even with a great story, isn't enough to hit that 38% fluency mark.
Right, because you still have to speak.
You can absorb all the grammar you want, but if you don't activate it, it degrades. You lose it.
So what happens next?
That brings us to the final requirements of the script. Closing the loop.
The back end of the lesson.
Right. The playbook dictates a mandatory practice section involving active listening and speaking, then a recap.
And a recap, for those listening, is just a short review of what we just learned.
Exactly. And crucially, it requires a practice assignment.
The practice assignment. I think this is perhaps the most vital step in the entire framework.
It forces them to take the lesson into the real world.
Because, think about it, the 25 minutes of listening. No matter how natural our conversation is, it is still a controlled environment.
It is a simulation.
Yes, a simulation. The listener is safe. If you mispronounce a word during the shadowing exercise in your living room, nobody laughs at you.
There are no stakes.
But the real world has stakes.
Exactly. The practice assignment is designed to bridge the gap between the safety of the podcast simulation and the reality of the learner's actual English-speaking environment.
It pushes them out of the nest.
It really does. The assignment could be something incredibly specific, derived from the daily life examples. Like, tomorrow, when you go to the store, we want you to use this exact shadowing phrase to ask for a receipt.
It forces them to endure the friction of real-world communication.
Which is scary.
It is. Pushing an adult learner out of the nest is incredibly risky because adults, we hate feeling incompetent.
It is a deeply vulnerable state. When you are a highly competent adult in your native language, maybe you are a manager, a doctor, a parent, and suddenly you are reduced to the linguistic capability of a toddler.
Oh, your ego takes a massive hit.
A huge hit. The fear of embarrassment is actually the #1 reason adult language learners quit.
Which perfectly explains the very last rule in the playbook.
Emotional support.
Yes. The final required step isn't just a standard call to action like, reminding people to subscribe or like the video.
Though they obviously include that for channel growth.
Sure, of course. But the framework specifically demands a motivational closing line.
It is a structural necessity for retention.
I found that so incredibly empathetic. The writers are forced to acknowledge the vulnerability of the listener.
Learning is hard.
It is so hard, and it can make people feel really shy or scared. Ending the session with genuine encouragement, reminding the learner that the struggle is part of the process, that their effort is valid, that human touch is what gets the listener to press play on the next lesson.
If we connect all of this back to the core premise, that 38% fluency increase, we see that the metric isn't achieved through some, magical linguistic algorithm.
Right.
It is achieved through behavioral consistency. The motivation is just as important as the vocabulary.
Because if they quit because they feel stupid, the fluency increase is 0.
Exactly. Motivation is literally the final gear in the machine.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at the entire landscape we just mapped out for you guys.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. The English Stark framework isn't just a list of writing tips. It is a highly engineered psychological tool.
Let's summarize it. We started by looking at shadowing, not as simple parroting, but as a mechanism for bypassing cognitive hesitation.
Building immediate muscle memory in the mouth using simple commands.
Right. And we saw how it protects the A2 learner's working memory by mandating that complex words be introduced naturally, in context.
No academic jargon. It acts as an invisible tutorial level, slowly getting harder.
We analyzed the absolute necessity of the 20 to 30-year-old persona using peer mimicry, humor, and the crucial mechanics of back-channeling and interruptions.
Talking in a natural, friendly way instead of sounding like a robot, and avoiding monologues.
Then we uncovered the Trojan horse strategy, using a blended, unlabeled structure where grammar and vocabulary are smuggled into the brain inside engaging daily life narratives.
Mixing real-life examples with active practice. And finally, we examined the mechanism for bridging the gap between the safe simulation and the real world through practice assignments.
All held together by the emotional scaffolding of a motivational closing.
It really is a masterclass in behavioral design. But, as I was reading through this playbook, thinking about the mechanics of shadowing and immediate physical repetition, I couldn't help but zoom out.
What stands out to you?
Well, we've established that this framework is a highly effective engine for language acquisition, right?
Definitely.
You listen to an expert, you immediately mimic their exact output, you incrementally increase the difficulty of your environment, and you practice in a high-stakes reality.
Right, that's the formula.
But is that just how we learn language, or is that the fundamental algorithm for learning anything?
Oh, wow. You're suggesting shadowing transcends linguistics.
Think about it. What if you applied the exact rules of the English Spark playbook to, executive leadership?
Okay, I'm listening.
If you are a terrified junior manager, you don't become a great leader by reading a Harvard Business Review textbook on management theory in a quiet room.
No, you'd have to shadow.
You would find a highly competent leader, sit in their meetings, and literally mimic their tone of voice, their posture, their pacing when they deliver bad news.
You would bypass your own anxiety by just physically acting out their behaviors.
Exactly. Until the muscle memory of confidence is baked into your own nervous system.
The physical action precedes the psychological comfort.
Yes. And it works for physical skills, too. If you want to learn how to paint, you don't study the chemical composition of acrylics.
You put your canvas next to a master painter.
Exactly. And when they make a brushstroke, you immediately mirror that brushstroke. You shadow the creation in real time.
Yeah, right.
The playbook shows us how to hack a language by acting like a vocal parrot. But maybe it's actually exposing a deeper truth about human potential.
That is a fascinating thought.
We spend so much of our life waiting until we feel ready or smart enough to try something new. We wait to read one more book or study one more theory.
But the English Spark framework proves that the fastest way to master the unknown isn't to study it from afar.
Exactly. It's to step directly into the noise, find a voice you trust, and start echoing it until it becomes your own.
What a profound way to look at it.
So for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel motivated to get out there and start shadowing, whether it's a new language, a new skill, or just a new way of being. Keep practicing, and we'll catch you next time.